In the winter of 1862, the Dakota Territory stretched endlessly across the American frontier, a cold, empty land where families could disappear without a trace. Among the scattered farms, none drew more quiet talk than the Lindholm homestead, located over 40 miles from the nearest settlement of Whitmore Creek. Henrik Lindholm, originally from Sweden, arrived in 1863 after the Homestead Act encouraged immigrants to claim land. He secured nearly 320 acres, an unusually large piece for a single family, and moved there with his wife, Astrid, and their first child, Magnus, who was only 2. Unlike other settlers, the Lindholms kept completely to themselves. They never joined church services, never attended community events, and had no contact with family back in Sweden. Their small farmhouse, built of rough timber and stone, rarely showed the warm light of oil lamps like other homes in the area. What truly set the family apart was their children. Between 1863 and 1875, Astrid gave birth to 12 more, making a total of 13 children. Large families were common at the time, but visitors quickly noticed something unusual. Every Lindholm child looked and acted almost exactly the same, as if they were copies of one another, different only in age and size. The first written account came from Thomas Eriksson, a Swedish pastor, who visited in 1878. He noted that the children had the same pale blue eyes, sharp cheekbones, and thin lips, and that they often spoke in perfect unison, finishing each other's sentences without error. Local merchants also noticed this. Samuel Morrison, who ran the general store in Whitmore Creek, wrote that no matter which child came to town with Henrik, they always bought the same items in the same way, with the same precise mannerisms. Talking to them felt, he said, like speaking to the same person in different clothing. Dr. William Carver, the region's only physician, also found the family strange. He recorded that the children not only looked alike, but shared identical habits, vocal patterns, and even a slight tremor in their left hands. They never seemed comfortable apart, becoming anxious when separated, and their home reflected this same order. Beds, chairs, clothing, and meals were arranged with identical precision, leaving no room for individuality. Letters from Margaret Whitmore, wife of the settlement's founder, described her 1881 visit to the Lindholm farm. She wrote that the children worked together as if they shared a single mind, anticipating each other's actions without speaking. They showed no individual personalities, laughing, frowning, and reacting all at the same time. In 1880, a traveling photographer named Augustus Fleming captured the only known photo of the family. Even in this formal portrait, the children's identical features were unnerving. Their bone structure looked the same across ages, from toddlers to teenagers. Reports of disturbing behavior began in 1881. Neighbors claimed to see the children standing in perfect formations for hours, moving or speaking in exact unison. Others reported seeing them sitting silently for long periods, watching water or fields as if waiting for something unseen. Travelers who stayed at the Lindholm farm spoke of strange experiences, including hearing all 13 children chanting in an unknown language late at night, swaying in unison as if in a trance. Henrik dismissed this as shared dreams and treated it as normal. Dr. Carver later recorded cases where treating one child seemed to affect all of them. When Magnus had pneumonia, his siblings coughed at the same time. When he was given medicine, the others showed signs of sedation despite not being treated. In another case, when one child was injured, all 13 showed the same symptoms and pain responses, forcing Carver to bandage them all. Religious leaders were equally disturbed. Reverend Peter Anderson wrote in 1882 that the children answered catechism questions only as a group, never as individuals. When separated, they became sick until reunited. During prayers, they moved and spoke as one, giving the impression of a single voice. By 1882, neighbors were openly fearful. Reports spread of the children forming human chains across the farm in freezing weather, adjusting their positions without speaking, or appearing as identical silhouettes in every window of the farmhouse at perfectly timed intervals. A mail carrier described hearing a haunting song at night that seemed to come from all of them at once. Community suspicion deepened in 1882 after Dr. Carver treated what should have been a single injury but found all 13 children displaying the same wounds. Rumors spread quickly, and families began to avoid the Lindholm property entirely. Petitions were filed demanding authorities investigate what many believed was unnatural or even dangerous. By 1883, the family's isolation was complete. They refused all invitations, ordered unusual supplies in bulk, and seemed to vanish from public life, though smoke still rose from their chimney. Then, territorial surveyor Edwin Cartwright stumbled on hidden documents in an abandoned cabin. These papers included the journal of Dr. Friedrich Hausmann, a German physician who had worked with the Lindholms in 1879. Hausmann's writings described the children's synchronized heartbeats and identical blood reactions to tests. He discovered their biology was too uniform to be natural, with results so consistent that they seemed impossible for a family created by two parents. Even Henrik and Astrid showed these same traits. His final notes suggested their very cells appeared artificially sustained, unlike anything in natural human biology. Dr. Hausmann's final notes described cells that showed no normal variation and resisted the usual decay process. Even samples taken at different times from different family members developed in exactly the same way, as though they were pieces of one organism rather than separate people. His journal ended abruptly on December 23, 1879, with a final entry describing a tense confrontation with Henrik. In shaky handwriting, Hausmann recorded Henrik's words, "You do not understand the purity we preserve. We are not limited like lesser bloodlines. Our children continue something that began long before your science and will exist long after it is gone." The second major piece of evidence came from Territorial Marshal James Weatherby, who investigated the family in 1883 after growing complaints. His official report noted disturbing gaps in the Lindholm records. None of the children had birth certificates or church baptismal records despite living in Dakota Territory for nearly 20 years. Henrik claimed documents were lost on the journey from Sweden, but he could provide no proof of his own immigration or citizenship. When authorities contacted Swedish officials, they found no record of a Lindholm family matching his claims. Interviews with the family proved unsettling. Every member gave identical answers, word for word, no matter who was questioned. When separated, they became sick and incoherent until reunited. Even Henrik and Astrid showed the same distress when apart. Weatherby also noted that the house contained no personal belongings. Everything, from clothes to tools, was shared in exact order. All 15 family members slept in a single room, their beds arranged with geometric precision. Hidden in Henrik's belongings, Weatherby found charts tracking each child's growth and behavior. They included symbols not matching any known writing system, along with anatomical drawings that didn't match human physiology. He also noted that the Lindholm farm produced no crops for market. Their livestock showed severe inbreeding and unusual coordination, moving almost as if under one mind. During one inspection, all 13 children suddenly collapsed at once, stricken with identical symptoms. Just as quickly, they recovered as if nothing had happened. Henrik calmly explained this was normal, that his children were simply sensitive to outside forces. Alarmed, Weatherby urged federal intervention. Authorities sent investigators in August 1883, but by then the farm was empty. Belongings were left behind, yet there was no sign of the family's departure and no trail to follow. Locals soon reported strange happenings at the abandoned farm, voices singing in harmony that seemed to rise from underground, and pale figures moving across fields in precise formation. Months later, construction crews demolishing the farmhouse uncovered a hidden underground chamber. Inside were Henrik's records, written in Swedish, German, and English. These papers revealed that the family was the product of a long-running experiment in bloodline purification, which had begun in Sweden in the early 1800s. The Lindholms were the final stage of generations of selective breeding designed to erase genetic variation and create a single, unified organism across multiple bodies. Henrik and Astrid were not a normal couple but siblings, bred specifically for compatibility. Their children were carefully controlled from birth, fed the same food, raised in the same routines, conditioned to act without individuality. Henrik's underground lab contained crude scientific tools far too advanced for a frontier farm. His notes described experiments with blood and tissue, aimed at removing differences between individuals and building a shared consciousness. His writings revealed his philosophy, that separate human identities were a corruption of true humanity. He believed perfection meant returning to a collective mind, with the Lindholm children as the first proof of success. Their synchronized actions and identical appearances were not flaws, but deliberate design. Henrik had fled Sweden after his work was exposed and continued it in America, where isolation offered cover. His papers even outlined a plan to spread his experiment into other communities by intermarriage, gradually blending his unified bloodline into unsuspecting populations. Investigators later found families in nearby territories with the same unusual traits. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a physician brought in to study the records, concluded that Henrik's methods were decades ahead of modern genetics. She wrote that the Lindholm children were not simply trained, they were fundamentally changed, sharing one consciousness across many bodies. Over the years, families with similar traits kept appearing, only to vanish before investigators could study them. Reports from remote areas told of communities where residents moved and spoke in unison, showing no individuality. In 1889, a dying miner in Colorado confessed to seeing what he believed were the grown Lindholm children, now adults with families of their own. According to his account, they had built a small settlement in the mountains where the second generation showed even greater uniformity, functioning as perfect parts of one mind. Modern testing of preserved tissue samples has confirmed genetic uniformity that science still cannot explain. No known techniques account for how Henrik achieved it. The government has kept most case files restricted, citing security concerns about possible misuse of his methods. To this day, travelers near the old Lindholm site report hearing faint, synchronized voices on calm nights, carried across the prairie. Some believe these sounds are echoes of the past. Others suspect they are proof that Henrik's collective still survives, hidden in plain sight, continuing the experiment beyond the reach of outside authority. The story of the Lindholm family remains one of the most unsettling mysteries recorded on the American frontier. What began as quiet rumors about an isolated farm grew into documented evidence of something that defied both science and belief. Their children were not simply siblings who resembled one another. They were part of an experiment that erased individuality, shaping them into pieces of a single shared consciousness. Henrik's own records, uncovered beneath the abandoned farmhouse, revealed that this outcome was not an accident. It was the result of generations of careful planning, selective breeding, and methods that anticipated scientific discoveries by nearly a century. His vision was not of a family, but of a collective organism spread across multiple bodies, bound together by one mind. He believed individuality was weakness, and that human perfection could only be achieved by returning to a unified consciousness. What makes the Lindholm case more disturbing is not only what happened on that remote farm in Dakota Territory, but the possibility that the family's work did not end there. Reports of similar families appearing in scattered settlements, only to disappear before authorities could investigate, suggest the experiment may have continued long after the Lindholms vanished. Even modern analysis of preserved tissue samples confirms levels of genetic uniformity beyond what science can explain today. More than a century later, travelers still speak of strange voices drifting across the prairie near the old Lindholm site, rising and falling in eerie harmony. Some dismiss these accounts as folklore. Others wonder if they are signs that Henrik's creation still exists, hidden in the wilderness, continuing to grow in silence. The Lindholm mystery forces us to confront unsettling questions. What does it mean to be human? Is individuality essential to our identity, or could humanity survive, or even thrive, under a shared mind? Henrik believed the answer was clear, and his family was proof of it. Whether history remembers him as a visionary or a monster, his experiment succeeded in ways that remain unexplained. And that is what lingers most of all, the haunting possibility that somewhere, beyond the reach of ordinary life, the Lindholm collective still walks among us.